The early morning sun cast long shadows across Atlanta International Airport's Terminal B as Marcus Thompson walked through the crowded hallway. At 42 years old, he carried himself with quiet confidence, his clean white medical coat drawing occasional glances from passing travelers. The rolling suitcase behind him contained carefully organized patient files and medical documents he needed for his upcoming surgery in Boston. Marcus checked his watch, 6:45 a.m. He was early for his regular Thursday morning flight, just as he liked it. After 15 years of making this weekly trip to lead his surgical team at Boston General Hospital, punctuality had become second nature to him. At Gate B7, the boarding area was already filling up with the usual mix of business travelers and tourists. Marcus sat down, pulled out his laptop, and began reviewing his notes for tomorrow's complicated brain surgery. A young mother struggling with a crying baby caught his attention. Without hesitation, he reached into his bag and pulled out a small packet of cookies he always carried for his own snack. "Here you go," he said warmly, offering them to the grateful mother. Sometimes a little snack helps during takeoff. The baby's cries softened as it munched on a cookie, and several nearby passengers smiled at the kind gesture. When boarding began, Marcus waited patiently in the first-class line. He had earned his frequent flyer status the hard way, saving lives one flight at a time. As he handed his boarding pass to the gate agent, her eyes lit up with recognition. "Good morning, Dr. Thompson. Another week in Boston." "Yes, Linda," he smiled, remembering how she always had a kind word for everyone. 2 surgeries scheduled for tomorrow. The aircraft interior was cool and familiar as Marcus made his way to seat 3A. He carefully stored his medical documents in the overhead bin and settled into his seat, already thinking about the challenging procedures ahead. His thoughts were interrupted by the arrival of Sarah Wilson, one of the flight attendants. Sarah had been flying this route for 15 years, and her perfectly pressed uniform and rigid posture spoke of someone who took pride in their work. However, as she moved through the cabin during pre-flight preparations, something felt off about her behavior. When she reached Marcus's row, her smile noticeably tightened. Despite his polite good morning, she moved past without acknowledgement, though she cheerfully greeted the elderly white couple across the aisle. As other passengers boarded, Marcus observed a pattern. Sarah's warmth and attention seemed selective, varying notably depending on who she was addressing. When a young black family with 2 small children settled into row 5, they had to ask 3 times for help with their bags before Sarah reluctantly assisted them. Marcus sighed quietly, all too familiar with such subtle behaviors. As a neurosurgeon, he had faced similar prejudices throughout his career, even from patients who couldn't see past their own biases to accept life-saving care from his skilled hands. The boarding process continued, and Marcus pulled out his phone to send a quick text to his surgical team in Boston. He had just finished typing when Sarah passed by again, this time helping a businessman store his laptop bag despite not having been asked. "Excuse me," Marcus said politely, raising his hand slightly. "Could I get a glass of water before takeoff?" Sarah's eyes slid past him as if he hadn't spoken. A few minutes later, she returned with water for several other first-class passengers but skipped his row entirely. Marcus remained calm, his expression neutral. Years of performing delicate brain surgeries had taught him patience and composure under pressure. He made a mental note of each interaction, each subtle slight, not out of bitterness but from a lifetime of learning to document such behaviors. As the plane finished boarding and the doors closed, Marcus pulled out his patient files again. Tomorrow's surgeries wouldn't wait, regardless of today's challenges. He had learned long ago that the best response to prejudice was excellence, and his patients needed him at his best. Little did anyone on Flight 2317 know that this routine Thursday morning flight was about to become anything but ordinary, and that the next few hours would change not just Marcus's and Sarah's lives, but would spark a conversation that would reach far beyond the confines of this aircraft. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing their departure as Sarah began her safety demonstration, still avoiding eye contact with Marcus. The stage was set for what would become one of the most talked-about incidents in recent aviation history. Flight 2317 reached its cruising altitude, and the seatbelt signs turned off with a quiet ding. The morning sun streamed through the windows as passengers settled in for the 2-hour journey to Boston. In first class, Marcus Thompson sat reviewing his medical charts, occasionally making notes in the margins about tomorrow's surgeries. Sarah Wilson began the drink service, pushing her cart slowly down the aisle. Her practiced smile remained fixed as she served the passengers in the first row. Coffee? Tea? Orange juice? She asked each person, her voice professionally pleasant. When she reached the elderly couple across from Marcus in row 3, her smile became genuine. Here's your coffee, Mr. and Mrs. Davidson. Extra cream, just how you like it. She even added a few extra packets of cookies to their napkins. Marcus looked up from his work, waiting patiently for his turn. When Sarah started to push her cart past his seat without stopping, he spoke up. Excuse me, I'd like some coffee, please. Sarah acted as if she hadn't heard him, continuing to the next row. A businessman behind Marcus frowned, noticing the obvious slight. This wasn't the first time during the flight that Sarah had ignored Marcus's requests. Marcus raised his hand again, his voice remaining professional but firm. Miss Wilson, I've been trying to get your attention. Could I please have some coffee? Several passengers were now watching the interaction. Sarah turned back, her movements stiff. We'll get to you when we can, she said curtly, though her cart was right there, filled with fresh coffee. I've been waiting patiently, Marcus replied calmly. And I notice you've served everyone else in first class except me. A young woman in row 4 pulled out her phone, sensing the tension in the air. Sarah noticed this and finally turned to Marcus, her lips pressed into a thin line. Fine. You want coffee? Here's your coffee. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Sarah lifted the coffee pot, but instead of pouring it properly, she deliberately tilted it at an angle. Hot coffee splashed across Marcus's medical documents and down his crisp white coat. Several passengers gasped as the brown liquid spread across the papers containing tomorrow's surgical plans. Oh, I'm so sorry, Sarah said, her voice dripping with insincerity. It must have slipped. The businessman behind Marcus immediately pressed his call button. That was completely deliberate, he called out. I saw the whole thing. Marcus sat very still, coffee dripping from his ruined coat onto his pants. His years of handling delicate surgical procedures helped him maintain his composure, even as his carefully prepared medical documents were stained beyond repair. I'd like to speak to the lead flight attendant, Marcus said quietly, his dignity intact despite the coffee soaking into his clothes. Other passengers were now standing up, phones recording the scene. The young mother from the gate area spoke up from a few rows back. This is unacceptable. He was nothing but kind to me and my baby earlier. Sarah's face suddenly lost its color as the lead flight attendant, Jenny Martinez, rushed forward from the back of the plane. What's going on here? Jenny asked, then stopped short when she saw Marcus. Her eyes widened with recognition. Dr. Thompson. Jenny's voice was filled with disbelief. Oh my God, you're Dr. Thompson from Boston General? Marcus nodded slightly, using napkins to try to save his medical documents. This is the surgeon who saved my daughter's life last year, Jenny announced, her voice shaking. He spent 12 hours in surgery when other doctors said it was hopeless. Sarah's face went from pale to ashen. The coffee pot trembled in her hands as she realized the magnitude of her actions. The captain's voice came over the intercom. This is your captain speaking. Jenny, please come to the cockpit immediately. As Jenny hurried to the front, Marcus finally stood up, his impressive height and professional bearing drawing all eyes. Despite the coffee stains, his medical coat still carried the embroidered words. Dr. Marcus Thompson, Chief of Neurosurgery, Boston General Hospital. The silence in the cabin was deafening. Sarah took an involuntary step backward, suddenly understanding that her actions, born from prejudice, had targeted one of the country's top brain surgeons, and every second of it had been captured on multiple phones. Marcus looked at her with calm dignity and said just 4 words. We need to talk. The atmosphere in the first-class cabin crackled with tension as Jenny Martinez returned from the cockpit. Behind her came Captain David Miller, who had put his co-pilot in charge temporarily to address the situation. Coffee still dripped from Marcus's once pristine white coat as passengers continued recording with their phones. Dr. Thompson, Captain Miller said, his voice carrying authority, I've been briefed about what happened. I apologize for this inexcusable incident on behalf of the airline. Sarah stood frozen, her hands clutching the half-empty coffee pot. Her whole world seemed to be crumbling around her as more revelations about Marcus emerged. "Everyone, please take your seats," Jenny announced, then turned to Marcus. "Dr. Thompson, would you mind sharing with the cabin what you're flying to Boston for? I think it's important." Marcus straightened his coffee-stained coat. "I have 2 critical surgeries scheduled for tomorrow morning. One is for a 7-year-old girl with a rare brain tumor. The other is an elderly man with a severe aneurysm. Both operations require extensive preparation." He gestured to his ruined documents. These were their medical files. A collective gasp went through the cabin. The elderly couple who Sarah had served so warmly earlier looked horrified. Mrs. Davidson spoke up, her voice shaking. "You mean this gentleman is flying to save lives, and you deliberately poured coffee on his medical documents?" But there was more. A flight attendant from economy class rushed forward. "Captain, passengers from row 12 are asking if this is the same Dr. Thompson who performed emergency surgery on that school bus accident last month? The one on the news?" Marcus nodded modestly. "My team and I worked for 26 straight hours that day. We saved 11 children." Sarah's face crumpled as she realized the magnitude of her prejudice. The doctor she had targeted wasn't just any passenger. He was a renowned surgeon who had saved countless lives, including children. A businessman stood up. "I'm streaming this live on social media. Over 10,000 people are watching right now, and they're identifying Dr. Thompson. He's not just any surgeon. He's the one who pioneered that new technique for removing inoperable tumors. My sister's friend was his patient." More passengers from economy class had gathered near the dividing curtain. Having heard the commotion, one woman pushed forward. "Dr. Thompson, my son, you operated on him 2 years ago. The other doctors said you wouldn't make it, but you spent 18 hours in surgery and saved his life." The revelations kept coming. A college student from row 15 called out, "I just Googled him. He runs a free clinic in Atlanta every other weekend. He's won awards for providing medical care to underserved communities." Sarah finally spoke, her voice barely a whisper. I didn't know." "That's precisely the problem," Marcus said quietly. "You didn't try to know. You saw what you wanted to see and acted on your prejudices." Captain Miller cleared his throat. "Ms. Wilson, please gather your belongings. You'll be removed from service immediately. We'll have a replacement flight attendant take over your duties." As Sarah moved to collect her things, tears streaming down her face, Marcus did something unexpected. He stood up and addressed the cabin. "I'd like to say something." The entire cabin fell silent. "What happened here today is bigger than just me. It happens to people of color every day, in every profession, at every level. Most don't have the protection of titles or medical degrees. Most incidents don't go viral or get recorded, but they all hurt just the same." He turned to Sarah. "I don't want your tears or your apology. I want you to learn and grow from this. I want you to understand that excellence, dedication, and humanity come in all colors." Jenny stepped forward. "Dr. Thompson, we've arranged for a first-class passenger to switch seats with you. We found a clean shirt in the crew's extra uniforms, and the flight purser is reprinting your medical documents from our onboard system." As the situation began to settle, passengers returned to their seats, still buzzing with conversation about what they'd witnessed. Sarah was escorted to the back of the plane, her career and reputation in shambles, while Marcus's quiet dignity and professionalism had revealed not just his title, but his true character. The incident on Flight 2317 was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning to unfold on social media platforms across the world, sparking a conversation that would reach far beyond the confines of this aircraft. As Flight 2317 continued its journey to Boston, the atmosphere in the cabin remained charged with emotion. Marcus Thompson now sat in a fresh uniform shirt provided by the crew, carefully reviewing the reprinted medical documents at his new seat. The coffee stains on his medical coat served as a visible reminder of what had transpired just 30 minutes earlier. Sarah Wilson sat in the back galley, her face buried in her hands while another flight attendant, Maria, had taken over her duties. The video of the incident had already gone viral, with hashtag Flight 2317 and hashtag #DrThompson trending on social media platforms. Suddenly, the call button chimed from row 8. An elderly passenger, Mr. Chen, was experiencing chest pain and breathing heavily. His wife frantically waved for help. Is there a doctor on board? Maria called out, forgetting for a moment about Marcus's presence. Without hesitation, Marcus stood up, putting aside his ruined coat. He moved quickly to row 8, his professional demeanor taking over completely. I'm Dr. Thompson. Sir, can you tell me what you're feeling? Mr. Chen, clutching his chest, looked up at Marcus with worried eyes. Tight. Chest feels tight, he managed to say between labored breaths. Marcus knelt in the aisle, his focus entirely on his unexpected patient. Jenny, please bring the plane's medical kit, he called out calmly. And if you have oxygen, we'll need that too. The same passengers who had witnessed Sarah's discriminatory behavior now watched in amazement as Marcus worked. His hands moved with practiced efficiency as he checked Mr. Chen's pulse and listened to his breathing. Sir, I believe you're having a panic attack, Marcus explained gently. The incident earlier may have triggered it. I'm going to help you through this, okay? Sarah watched from the back, tears flowing freely as she saw Marcus caring for a passenger in distress, the same doctor she had treated so poorly just moments before. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Jenny brought the medical kit and oxygen, and Marcus worked skillfully to help Mr. Chen regulate his breathing. He spoke in a calm, reassuring voice, explaining each step of what he was doing. Take slow, deep breaths with me, Mr. Chen, Marcus instructed. That's right. In through your nose, out through your mouth. You're doing great. Other passengers watched silently, some still recording, as Marcus demonstrated the breathing technique. Mrs. Chen held her husband's hand, her eyes filled with gratitude. After about 15 minutes, Mr. Chen's breathing returned to normal, and his chest pain subsided. Thank you, doctor, he said, his voice stronger now. I'm so sorry for causing trouble. Marcus smiled warmly. No trouble at all, sir. This is what I do. I'm going to check on you every 20 minutes until we land, just to be safe. As Marcus stood up, the cabin burst into spontaneous applause. Several passengers wiped tears from their eyes, moved by the stark contrast between how Sarah had treated Marcus and how he now treated others. Captain Miller's voice came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we're about an hour from Boston. I want to personally thank Dr. Thompson for assisting our passenger. This is the true spirit of humanity we should all strive for. Marcus returned to his seat, where he found a stack of handwritten notes from economy passengers. There were messages of support, thanks, and even some stories about loved ones who had been saved by dedicated doctors like him. In the back galley, Sarah watched as Maria distributed drinks with a smile to every passenger, regardless of their appearance. The lesson was clear: service, like medicine, should be given equally to all. Jenny approached Marcus with a satellite phone. Dr. Thompson, the airline's regional director, is on the line. They want to speak with you about what happened. Marcus took the phone, but before speaking, he looked back at Sarah in the galley. Their eyes met briefly across the cabin. In that moment, Sarah saw not the man she had prejudged, but a dedicated physician who had just shown everyone on board what true professionalism looked like. As the plane began its initial descent into Boston, passengers continued to share the video and their personal accounts of what they witnessed. But more than just documenting an incident of discrimination, they were sharing stories of how Dr. Thompson's response, his dignity, professionalism, and compassion, had touched their hearts and opened their minds. Flight 2317 was carrying more than just passengers now. It was carrying a powerful lesson about judgment, redemption, and the importance of seeing beyond one's biases. The morning after the coffee incident, Skyline Airlines' corporate headquarters in Atlanta buzzed with urgent activity. By 8:00 a.m., the video had reached over 10 million views across various social media platforms. News vans lined up outside the building, their satellite dishes reaching toward the sky. Inside the main conference room, CEO Patricia Reynolds watched the viral video for the 20th time. Her face grew more concerned with each viewing. Around the table sat the airline's top executives, their breakfast untouched as they dealt with the growing crisis. Dr. Thompson's first surgery starts in 30 minutes, announced James Parker, the head of public relations. According to Boston General Hospital, both his patients' families have seen the video. They still want him to operate, saying they trust a doctor who shows such calm under pressure. The door opened, and Sarah Wilson entered, escorted by her union representative. Her usual confident posture was gone, replaced by slumped shoulders and red-rimmed eyes. She had spent the night reading thousands of angry comments online, many calling for her termination. "Ms. Wilson," Patricia began, her voice firm but not unkind, "do you understand the gravity of what happened on that flight?" Sarah nodded, barely able to look up. "Yes, ma'am. I let my prejudices control my actions. I embarrassed myself, the airline, and worst of all, I potentially put Dr. Thompson's patients at risk by damaging their medical files." Meanwhile, at Boston General Hospital, Marcus prepared for surgery in the washing room. Nurses and fellow doctors kept stopping by, some offering support, others sharing their own stories of discrimination in the workplace. Back in Atlanta, Patricia's phone buzzed. It was a message from Marcus himself. She put it on speaker for everyone to hear. "Good morning, Ms. Reynolds. I understand you're meeting about yesterday's incident. Before you make any decisions, I'd like to make a suggestion. Instead of just firing Ms. Wilson, let's use this as a chance to create real change. I'm willing to help develop a new training program for your staff. Sometimes, the best way to fight discrimination is through education, not punishment." The room fell silent. Sarah looked up, tears flowing down her cheeks. Patricia stood up, making a decision. "Here's what we're going to do. First, we're issuing a public apology to Dr. Thompson. Second, Sarah, you're suspended for 3 months without pay." Sarah nodded, accepting the punishment. "But," Patricia continued, "during those 3 months, you'll be required to complete an intensive diversity training program. If Dr. Thompson is willing, we'd like him to help design it. This isn't just about punishing one person. It's about making sure this never happens again on any of our flights." The PR team quickly drafted an official statement, which soon appeared on all Skyline Airlines' social media accounts. "We deeply regret the discriminatory incident on Flight 2317. The actions of our employee do not reflect our values. We are taking immediate steps to address this, including implementing new training programs with input from Dr. Marcus Thompson. We are committed to ensuring every passenger feels respected and valued on our flights." By afternoon, the story had reached national news. Interviews with passengers from the flight played on major networks. The elderly couple, Mr. and Mrs. Davidson, appeared on screen. We watched the whole thing. The way Dr. Thompson handled it, with such grace and professionalism, it opened our eyes too. At Boston General Hospital, Marcus emerged from his first successful surgery. The young girl's tumor had been removed completely. As he walked to his office to prepare for his second surgery, his phone was filled with messages of support from around the world. One message caught his eye. It was from Jenny Martinez, the lead flight attendant. "Dr. Thompson, my daughter asked about you this morning. She said she wants to become a doctor now, to help people like you do. You're changing lives in more ways than you know." The airline's stock price had dropped significantly during the day, but after announcing their comprehensive response plan and Marcus's involvement in their new training program, it began to stabilize. Sarah sat in her small apartment, watching the coverage. She picked up her phone and, with trembling fingers, began typing an email to Dr. Thompson. She knew apologizing wouldn't be enough. She needed to show through actions that she could change and grow from this experience. The incident on Flight 2317 was becoming more than just a viral video. It was turning into a catalyst for real change in corporate America's approach to diversity and inclusion. 1 month after the coffee incident, Sarah Wilson sat nervously in the main training room at Skyline Airlines headquarters. Today was different from her usual diversity training sessions. Dr. Marcus Thompson himself would be speaking to the entire airline staff. The room was packed with over 200 airline employees, from flight attendants to pilots to ground crew. Many had their phones ready, eager to share on social media that the now famous doctor was speaking at their training. At exactly 9:00 a.m., Marcus walked onto the stage. He wore a new white medical coat, and despite his recent fame, his manner remained humble. The room fell silent. "Good morning," he began, his voice calm and clear. "I'm not here to shame anyone. I'm here to help us all learn and grow together." In the front row, Sarah fought back tears. This was her first time seeing Marcus in person since that day on the plane. She had spent the past month reading books about discrimination, watching documentaries, and attending counseling sessions. Marcus clicked to his first slide, showing a picture of himself in surgery. "Before I was Dr. Thompson from the viral video, I was just a boy from Atlanta who dreamed of saving lives. Let me tell you about the first time someone told me I couldn't be a doctor because of the color of my skin. The audience leaned forward, captivated by his story. He shared experiences from medical school, his residency, and his career, times when patients refused his care, moments when other doctors underestimated him, and how he kept pushing forward. But here's the important part, Marcus continued. I didn't let those experiences make me bitter. Instead, they made me more determined to create change. Sarah raised her hand, surprising everyone. Her voice shook as she spoke. Dr. Thompson, may I say something to everyone? Marcus nodded encouragingly. Sarah stood and turned to face her colleagues. A month ago, I was the person in that viral video. I was the one who let my prejudices control my actions. I've spent every day since then thinking about why I did what I did. The room was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. I grew up in a small town, Sarah continued, where I rarely met people different from me. I carried those biases into my job without even realizing it. But that's no excuse. Dr. Thompson could have pressed charges. Instead, he chose to help create this training program. He chose to help me, to help all of us, learn and grow. Marcus smiled warmly. Thank you, Sarah. Your honesty is an important part of this process. He then shared videos of other professionals sharing their experiences with discrimination. A black female pilot, a Hispanic airport manager, and an Arab American security officer, all telling their stories. These are your colleagues, Marcus explained. They work alongside you every day. Their stories matter. Their experiences matter. The training continued with practical exercises. Marcus asked everyone to share moments when they might have acted on hidden biases. Many people spoke up, some crying as they acknowledged their past mistakes. The goal isn't to make you feel guilty, Marcus assured them. The goal is to make you aware. Awareness is the first step toward change. Near the end of the session, Marcus did something unexpected. He asked Sarah to join him on stage. Ms. Wilson, he said, would you be willing to help lead future training sessions? Your story, both the mistake and your journey to learn from it, could help others understand why this matters. Sarah's eyes widened in surprise. You would trust me to do that? Trust, like respect, is something we can earn back through our actions, Marcus replied. You've shown genuine commitment to learning and changing. That's valuable. The audience applauded, many wiping tears from their eyes. What they were witnessing wasn't just a training session, it was a powerful moment of transformation. As the session ended, employees lined up to thank both Marcus and Sarah. Many shared their own stories or admitted to biases they wanted to overcome. Sarah approached Marcus privately. I'll never be able to fully make up for what I did that day, she said. You're right, Marcus replied kindly, but you can help prevent it from happening to someone else. Sometimes our worst mistakes become our most important teaching tools. The training session made headlines. Viral video leads to revolutionary diversity training program. But more importantly, it marked the beginning of real change, not just at Skyline Airlines, but in workplaces across the country. 6 months after the coffee incident, the main auditorium at the National Aviation Conference in Chicago was filled to capacity. Sarah Wilson stood at the podium, her hands slightly shaking as she faced hundreds of airline industry professionals. My name is Sarah Wilson, she began, her voice stronger than she expected. You might know me as that flight attendant from the viral video. Today, I want to tell you how one terrible mistake changed not just my life, but helped change an entire industry. In the audience, Marcus Thompson sat quietly, watching the woman who had once poured coffee on him now leading a session on transforming airline culture, learning from our mistakes. Next to him sat Patricia Reynolds, Skyline Airlines CEO, who had flown in specially for this presentation. Sarah clicked to her first slide, showing the infamous video. 6 months ago, I let my prejudices control my actions. I discriminated against a passenger who turned out to be a renowned neurosurgeon. But Dr. Thompson's identity shouldn't have mattered. No one deserves to be treated that way. She then shared statistics. Since implementing their new training program, Skyline Airlines have received the highest customer satisfaction scores in its history. Passenger complaints about discrimination had dropped by 85%. But numbers don't tell the whole story, Sarah continued. Let me show you what real change looks like. She played a new video showing recent scenes from Skyline Airlines. A Muslim family being warmly welcomed aboard. A flight attendant helping an elderly Asian couple with their bags. A black executive being served with the same respect as other first-class passengers. Flight crews of diverse backgrounds working together seamlessly. In the back of the room, airline executives from other companies took notes. Skyline's new training program was becoming the gold standard in the industry. Sarah then shared something unexpected. Last week, a passenger recognized me from the viral video. Instead of treating me with anger, she asked if I could share my story with her daughter's school. She said, "If you can learn and change, anyone can." Marcus smiled, remembering how Sarah had come to him 3 months ago with the idea of turning their story into a teaching tool. Together, they had visited schools, businesses, and organizations, sharing their experience to help others recognize and overcome their biases. The presentation continued with Sarah explaining the practical changes Skyline had made. New hiring practices ensuring diverse representation at all levels. Regular bias awareness training for all employees. An anonymous reporting system for passengers and staff to report discrimination. Monthly listening sessions where employees could share their experiences. Partnerships with civil rights organizations to review and improve policies. But the most important change, Sarah said, her voice filled with emotion, happened in hearts and minds, including my own. She then invited Marcus to join her on stage. The audience stood and applauded as he walked up, his white medical coat as pristine as ever. "Dr. Thompson taught me that change doesn't happen through punishment alone," Sarah explained. "It happens through education, understanding, and a willingness to face our own biases." Marcus took the microphone. "What happened on Flight 2317 was painful, but look at the result. Skyline Airlines now leads the industry in inclusive practices. Sarah has become an advocate for change, and thousands of airline employees are learning to recognize and overcome their biases." Patricia Reynolds then joined them on stage to make an announcement. "Today, Skyline Airlines is launching a scholarship program for minority students pursuing careers in aviation. The first scholarship will be named after Dr. Marcus Thompson, in honor of his role in transforming our corporate culture." The audience erupted in applause. Journalists in the front row furiously took notes. Other airline representatives began asking how they could implement similar programs. After the presentation, Sarah found a quiet moment with Marcus. "Sometimes I still can't believe how much has changed," she said. "That morning on the plane, I thought my life was over. Instead, it was just beginning." Marcus nodded understanding. Sometimes our worst moments can lead to our greatest growth, if we're willing to learn from them. As they left the conference center, several flight attendants from other airlines approached Sarah, asking for advice on handling their own biases. The change was spreading, one conversation at a time. The incident on Flight 2317 had become more than a viral video or a corporate training program. It had become a symbol of how confronting bias with compassion and wisdom could lead to lasting change. 1 year after the coffee incident, the grand ballroom of the Boston Marriott sparkled with lights. Skyline Airlines was holding its annual employee conference, and this year was special. Over 1,000 airline employees filled the room, all eyes focused on the stage. Patricia Reynolds, the CEO, stood at the podium with a warm smile. 1 year ago, an incident on Flight 2317 shocked the nation. Today, we gather to celebrate how that moment transformed not just our airline, but the entire industry. In the front row, Sarah Wilson sat in her new uniform. Her name tag now read, Director of Diversity Training. Next to her was Jenny Martinez, recently promoted to Chief of Flight Services. Both women waited eagerly for the keynote speaker. "Ladies and gentlemen," Patricia announced, "please welcome our keynote speaker, Dr. Marcus Thompson." The room erupted in applause as Marcus walked onto the stage. He looked different from that day on the plane. More relaxed, yet somehow more powerful. He carried the confidence of someone who had helped change thousands of lives. "Good evening," Marcus began. "Exactly 1 year ago, I boarded Flight 2317 as a surgeon heading to Boston for 2 important operations. Today, I want to tell you about those patients." He clicked to his first slide, showing a smiling young girl playing soccer. "This is Emily, the 7-year-old whose brain tumor I removed that day. Last week, she won her school's sports competition." The audience clapped, many wiping tears. And this, he showed another slide, is Mr. Roberts, the elderly man with the aneurysm. He just celebrated his 50th wedding anniversary, surrounded by his grandchildren. Sarah felt tears rolling down her cheeks, remembering how she had almost jeopardized these surgeries with her actions. Marcus continued, "But today, I'm not here to talk about brain surgery. I'm here to talk about healing of a different kind, healing the biases that divide us." He shared statistics from the past year. Over 50,000 airline employees nationwide had gone through the training program he helped develop. Customer satisfaction scores had reached record highs. 20 other airlines had adopted similar diversity programs. Discrimination complaints across the industry had dropped by 60%. But numbers don't tell the whole story, Marcus said. The real story is in the changes I see every time I fly. He invited Sarah to join him on stage. The same audience that had once watched her viral video in horror now stood and applauded her courage to change. "Ms. Wilson," Marcus said warmly, "would you like to share your news?" Sarah stepped to the microphone. "Next month, I'm publishing a book called Learning to See People. It's about my journey from being the woman in that viral video to someone who now teaches others about overcoming bias. And Dr. Thompson," she paused, smiling, wrote the foreword. The audience applauded again. In the back of the room, several major news networks filmed the event. This wasn't just an airline conference. It was a milestone in corporate America's journey toward real inclusion. Marcus then made a surprise announcement. "Today, I'm proud to share that the Thompson-Wilson Scholarship Fund has raised over $2 million. This money will help minority students pursue careers in both aviation and medicine." Sarah gasped. She hadn't known the scholarship would carry her name too. Because, Marcus explained, true change happens when we recognize that every person, even those who have made mistakes, can be part of the solution. As the evening drew to a close, Marcus showed one final slide. It was a split screen. On one side, the viral video from Flight 2317. On the other, today's ceremony. "Life gives us choices," he said. "We can let our worst moments define us, or we can use them to create positive change." 1 year ago, a cup of coffee spilled on a plane. Today, that spill has created waves of change across the nation. The ceremony ended with a standing ovation. As people began to leave, a young black flight attendant approached Sarah and Marcus. "Thank you both," she said. "Because of your story, I had the courage to apply for a pilot training program. I start next month." Sarah and Marcus shared a knowing look. This was the real victory, not just changing policies, but changing lives. As they left the ballroom that evening, Marcus turned to Sarah, ready for another year of changing the world. Sarah smiled confidently. "One flight at a time, Dr. Thompson, one flight at a time."